Yo, what up everyone, how's it going? Today I'm going to show you guys how I made a bootleg remix of Blocked by DMView without a single stem. It's a really kick-ass tutorial, so let's just get going. So if you guys haven't already heard the song, go check out the original, and this is my bootleg here. So for anyone that already knows the original, you know that this is like a 128 bass house version. Now the original I think is like 140 or 150, which means I did a lot of slowing down, which for bootlegging is usually quite a problem, because if you slow something down and you stretch it, you're essentially just degrading the audio quality. But anyways, I'm going to take you guys through each step. So step number one for bootlegging or remixing a song when you don't have the stems is to find a song with a lot of spaces and gaps in it for easy chopping. And that's why I picked this song. This song has so many gaps in it. Let's see if I can just pull up the original here somewhere. So as you can see, there are massive gaps between every sound. Every sound has its own space. The wobbles all have their own space. Every fill has its own space. That fill there, completely isolated. And it's having these songs with a lot of isolation that make this a lot easier. That's not to say you can't do it if you don't have a song like this, and this song is kind of an exception. This is a very isolated song with really big gaps between each hit, but that's first of all going to make it so much easier. So step one, find a song with a lot of isolation or gaps in it. Step number two is actually going to be get the highest quality version of this song. Now, I actually messed that up, to believe it or not. So I had the idea for this bootleg, and I just was like, oh, I need to go. And all I had was the MP3, and I literally didn't even take the time to go download the wave. I literally just did it with an MP3. So don't do what I did, because my song is essentially a worse quality than it could have been, and you always want the highest quality version. So that's step two. Now, step three, what I did was I essentially made a sample pack. What I did is I went through this song piece by piece and I just cut it up. I would look for a single sample and I would just start chopping them up, and I would start coloring them. So this would be block. I would label it like that. I'd call it block. And then I'd go in and I'd find essentially my next sample and I'd color it differently. So that sound there could be one. I would chop that out. And I would do this over and over and over again until I had all these chunks. This entire piece here could be a chunk. And what I would do is I would make a sample pack. Now, this would work really well if I was sticking at the same tempo. The problem is I actually did this song at a completely different tempo. So there would actually be a step before that if you planned on completely changing the tempo, because the thing is, if you had a sample pack like this, it would all be at 140, 150, whatever this song originally was at. It wouldn't really work out. So what you want to do is you want to create a warped version before you make the sample pack, and you want to warp it to the tempo you're going to work at. And I know I want to work at 128. So that's actually a pre-step if you're going to do a different tempo. So a pre-step to the sample pack creation. But that's honestly a very easy fix. So what you want to do is I found the very first hit of my drop here. So let's do just that. Let's find the first hit of the drop. And make sure to get ultra specific on this. I recommend zooming way in here, getting the very first hit. Perfect. And with that ultra specific hit there, what you then do is you hit warp, and you'll see that this says 128 here. You don't want that. You actually want it to say the original tempo, which should be 140. So what you do is you right click this thing and you warp from here straight. And what you can see is it actually changed that to its original warping, 140.43, a little off. And you'll see that my original tempo up in the session was 128. That's how this worked. So now it's actually in time. You may have to go in afterward and do a little fiddling to get things right. But what you would do essentially is you'd go in and you'd make sure the whole thing is just warped perfectly. You want your song to be right on time. So I would go in and do that. I'm not going to for this tutorial because I'm going to save some time. But you know, you take time to make sure everything's right on beat. Once you have it right on beat, what's really important now, going back to the sample pack part, making your sample pack, is that the warp mode, if you're slowing it down or even speeding it up, is either in repitch, which in Ableton is the cleanest. It doesn't harm the sound in any way. All it does is just pitch it up and down. You can kind of think of it like a record player. If a record player plays faster, the pitch goes up. If it plays slower, the pitch goes down. So in this case, we're playing slower, the pitch would go down. That's an option, but then things are way out of key. It's kind of hard to work with. It's an option. What I did is I used beats mode for this. And the reason for this is beats mode, when you're using the play forward stop arrow, this one here, what it's doing is it's taking the original audio and then based off this time amount, it's playing that time amount of the original audio at its original speed, taking a little gap, waiting, then playing the next one. What I mean by this is if this is preserving a quarter note, plays the original song in quarter note chunks, waits a second, then plays the next quarter note chunk, and it's kind of start and stoppy, but the audio is well preserved, it's clean, you're not really damaging it at all. While a lot of the other warp modes you'll hear are just, you can hear all these grains coming from it. Complex Pro and Complex especially are just really going to damage your sound. But Beats mode, you can hear it's very start and stoppy. But that's actually very clean technically. So what you can do then, and I'll consolidate it so you can visually see it, now you have all these 8th note samples that you could chop up. So this is like, this is clap bass, you know, and you'd call it clap bass. And you'd color it a certain way. You'd find your next sample. It's like a tom type thing. I'll call that tom, even though it's clearly not a tom, but I'll call that a tom. Let's see what else we have. That's a whole string of wobble. We can just call that wobble. That's perfect. Give that a color. And you would go through this and you would pick out as many samples as you possibly can. And this gives you tools to now work with your song. And you have all these tools to then start chopping and mangling and manipulating. So now that we've essentially set up our bootleg to start working with, we can actually start the bootleg. So let's get into that. Cool, so now getting back into the original song. Let's go through and I'll kind of show you what I did. So what I did and one of my goals with this bootleg and this remix was to use pretty much no samples that weren't from the original. The exception were a couple drums, just this hat here, some kick layering. So I actually did keep most of the original kick. I did process it, however, just to keep some of the mids and kind of use it as a mid layer. And then I used a different kick layering as the bottom, just because I wanted a nice kind of houseier kick. But I did keep the original. And so what I did and what we have going on here is a useless frequency shifter doing absolutely nothing. I don't even know why that's still on. Spectrum, because I was kind of tuning it. And what's kind of cool is what's going on here. So I split my sound into 3 bands. And the reason for this is I just want to gate part of it. If I actually take off all the processing, this is the original kick. And you can hear there's like some ambience or something from the original recording that I kind of need to get out of there. So that's where gates and multiband splitting come into play. So I took the mids and I gated it. You can hear that shortened that quite a bit. Took out some of the noisy stuff. High or lows I kept the same. Highs I also gated to just kind of tighten it up. Here it takes out some of that bleed. And then I added this kind of like vocoder noise tutorial, which if you go to my most recent tutorial, or one of my most recent tutorials, I actually explain exactly what I do here. But essentially I make like a noise burst out of a vocoder. And then what I did is I took out most of the lows so I could bring in the new kick lows, added a saturator, and together our kick sounds like this. So the kick's pretty much the original with some added lows. And then I believe the clap is new as well. I just took one of my snares, excuse the vulgar name, and one of my claps. That's about it for new material, just because I found that the original clap, this one, didn't work very well as a house clap. I wanted something a little crunchier. So with that as kind of a preface, now we can go into the fact that everything else here is part of the original song. So let's just do that. Let's check out every single sound pretty much, starting with this sweep. So all that was obviously a reverse reverb of the original blocked vocal. Then I had the blocked vocal here, as you can see, as a cut up sample. So it's obviously kind of start and stoppy compared to the original 141, but it works. Now above that, layered in, we have this kind of grainy, stretched version of the original. So I mean, we have this fill, which is just the original one, that's fine, but then we also have this. Now that's really cool. If I stretch that out and we take a listen to what's actually going on here, I took the original file and I warped it and I resampled it, and you get something that sounds like this. I'll show you how I did it in a second. So what I did there is I took the original song, and we have it all the way over here, so this is great. I took the original song, which we have warped and stretched and mangled, and what I did is I resampled it. So I created a new track set to resampling, I armed it, I turned it off, and I recorded it while I stretched this out. Now I wanted it to still be in time, so I just doubled the length, maybe even quadrupled, I'm not sure. And then I hit record, and I'm going to play with the transposition and the warp modes to get these glitches out of the original sample. This is going to be key because I use these glitches throughout the song. You get the idea. And so what I would do is I recorded out all this material to work with by glitching the original, and I use those glitches throughout as kind of these cool textures that feel new, but they're based off the original. So this little texture sweep is one of them. Then the song starts. Now I took the original block and I did a bunch of fun kind of reverb and delay versions, and when you layer them, you get this here. So you'll notice that throughout, I'm just taking the original samples and I'm just mangling them. I'm adding glitches, delays, reverbs. So that kind of just fills out the intro. I took some of the basses and layered them in as well. Just kind of some low end to fill out the intro. This was again a glitch fill layered with percussion from the original and some fun panning, I believe. Nothing new. Everything's just reused, recycled. So, basic build up here, nothing fancy. So now let's look at the drop itself, and let's solo the basses here. So you can see this is just me chopping up essentially my bass sample pack. So this is just chopping up more hits, just again using the sample pack. A lot of repetition. And here I take one of the samples from later in the song and I kind of low pass it in here. Just as kind of a cool fill, but still using the original sample. And I layered that with a couple fills. The original percussion. And this sound here, which actually, oddly enough, was made out of the basses. It's one of the bass screeches that I like chopped up and panned. And I just found it was kind of haunting and creepy. Nothing new going on. And here all I'm doing on the repeats is just adding more chops and variation in there, but everything's relatively similar. We've also got a couple new basses from my sample pack, but nothing new creation-wise. Everything's still from the original song. It's just a lot of meticulous editing. And what you'll notice I do is I like to come up with a pattern that I repeat over and over again, which is kind of bass hit, bass chops, part one here, and then the deep wobble bass reply. Fill, repeat. Different fills, so the fills are always changing. And you'll see this is a slightly varied version as well. So each time I'm slightly varying the pattern, but it's the same kind of chop to chop to chop, wobble, 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 chop to chop to chop, wobble, wobble, wobble. Just each time I'm kind of switching out samples. And you'll notice that in my music a lot, where it's kind of like pattern one, pattern two, repeat that 4 times, take pattern one, pattern two, switch it, repeat that, switch it, repeat that, and you just kind of keep evolving. So there's always something new for the listener, but it's also very repetitive and just dancey and catchy. So here things are a little different. I got a new, instead of the wobble bass, I actually took this like low end sub bass, which you hear a lot in the song, and I layered it with this sound here. So with this sound here, what's really fun is because you've been using warp modes and you've been using the beats warp mode in the forward facing arrow, if you change the timing of that warping, you get completely different sounds. So let's say we set to a 16th note, 32nd note, half bar. That gives you totally different results. Not to mention you can also pitch that around. And because this is just a layer on top of the sub, you can pretty much do anything. That one's clearly an octave down. Every fill again from the original. So you're kind of noticing at this point, there actually wasn't much to it. I literally just chopped the original song, tried to preserve it as much as possible, and just coming up with patterns. And I really like that about house music. I find it's really easy to come up with patterns compared to other styles of music. One reason I kind of got into it recently. Now for the second half of the song, the only difference really is I was running out of ideas. I didn't want to just do drop, break down the same drop. So sometimes when I have no ideas, I just try out tripleting it. Just try putting it in a triplet timing, and it worked great. And it's exactly the same thing, except I went in and I changed my grid to Ableton's triplet grid, and I just made sure all the chops actually fit that grid. As well as the warping, that took a bit more. I had to go in and manually warp everything on a triplet grid, but because it's still preserved, there's no damage being done to the original audio. Even the fills, I would go in and triplet, take the time to just manually warp them. It takes a bit of time to, go in and triplet everything, but it's easy. Honestly, it's easier than and quicker than writing a whole new drop. And you'll notice it's sort of the same pattern as the original drop, as in like new sounds coming in and out, but just triplet. Some of the fills are a little different, but all from the original, as you see. Same song, same sounds. One thing too that I haven't mentioned yet is I didn't really process anything, because if you think about it, if you're taking something straight from the original, it's already been mixed, it's already been mastered, so it's already heavily processed to perfection. And if you add any other processing, you're going to start to take away from that, honestly. And I trust DMVU and whoever mastered it, that it sounded great. I trust their ears, so I didn't really alter that. So really, I mean, there's not much else. The end here is just switching up the patterns. You can see it's the same pattern, but now there's these fills in between, or these ones here, but it's all the same. And that's pretty much it. Honestly, there isn't much else to this. It was quite simple. At the bottom, you will notice there are like these effect layers made from the original grain fills that keep coming up. If I just solo a bunch of them, and I'll solo the drums as well, so you can kind of hear that. There we go. And all this stuff, I just made sure to high pass it, so the bass comes in fine. And that's about it. Now for the master, what I recommend doing, and what I did, is pretty much nothing. I just made sure I softly hit a limiter. But what I did, because I mixed it pretty much with the original sounds, just squeezing the drums in there with a lot of manual fades, no real sidechain compression. You'll see that over here, for example, I would just fade things out of the way of the kicks, and the claps have all these gaps. There's lots of space in this, so the drums kind of perfectly puzzle piece in. And if they technically match the volume of everything that was there before, you shouldn't have to slam it into a master. And again, I didn't want to master already mastered samples, so I just used a limiter. So that's it. I wish there was more to say, but it's actually that simple. You can just easily chop and edit full wave files of songs and create completely different flips, bootleg remixes, whatever you want to call it, easily. It's fun too. You don't need the stems as long as you pick the right source material. So I hope you guys actually go check out my bootleg. I'm going to leave it in the description of this video. I'll also leave the original track if you want to compare it. And I hope you got a lot out of this video. Thanks again, guys. I'm Kamodi. Peace.